All right, call to order the meeting for the Private Forest Accord Mitigation Advisory Committee today, Tuesday, October 21st. Andy, could you please lead us through a roll call?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. As I call your name, please respond in the affirmative if you're present. Chad Washington.
Here.
Joe Liebezeit.
Here.
Scott Lightcap.
Here.
Courtney Griesel.
Here.
Mark Stern.
Here.
Mark Grenbreimer. Jennifer Weichel.
Here.
Kate Wells. Sarah Gregory. Okay. I think Mark Grenbreimer is going to be joining us later. Chad, I believe he's held up in a meeting there, but I'll hand it back to you.
All right, great. Andy, thank you for distributing the agenda prior to the meeting. Has everyone gotten a chance to see the agenda, review it, and ready to approve it? Just a thumbs up would be fine. Great. Looks like we can consider our agenda approved. Next item of business, we've got our consent agenda, which just consists of the meeting minutes from the September meeting. Any corrections or amendments to that minutes from the September meeting? All right, seeing none, we can consider that approved. Andy, that brings us to public comment. Has anyone requested? Oh, shoot. Here at one of these ODF rooms that has motion sensors, so I better keep moving.
Thanks, Chad. We don't have any public comment requested at this time, but it's an opportunity for anyone online. Please feel free to raise your hand virtually or on the phone, unmute, and we'll call on you. All right, Chad. I'm not seeing anyone requesting it at this moment in time, so we can move on to the next agenda item here.
All right. Andy, I believe that you are up for our fall solicitation update. Do you mind providing a brief update?
Yes. Give me just a quick second to share some screen here. Chad, hopefully you're seeing the screen coming in right about now.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, cool. Thank you, guys. Let me just get my notes up here. All righty. Well, good afternoon now, everyone. For the record, my name is Andy Spurka. I'm the Private Forest Accord Grant Coordinator. Before I get into the solicitation update, Mark asked that I give just a brief update to the committee on the status of our new committee members that are to be appointed in place of Fran and Andrew, and I just want to do that before I forget. So thanks for that reminder, Mark. So the governor's office did not appoint them yet this month, and I'm informed that they anticipate to appoint them next month. So we plan to hopefully have them. They usually appoint them by the 5th. So when we decide on our next meeting date for November, after this agenda item, we may or may not see them, depending on when we do that meeting date, if we move it up a week. But usually it's the 5th of every month. They weren't able to do it this month. Any questions on that before I kind of get into it? I don't want to gloss over it, but it will be 2 new appointees by November. Okay, great. All right, well, I'll get right into the fall solicitation overview very briefly here. So that said, I just want to walk through the proposed 2025 fall solicitation timeline, as you see on screen here. Our November advisory committee meeting will finalize the grant guidelines, of course, and this timeline, also known as a call for applications through this program. Unless there's any opposition after this slide, I do plan to publicly post and announce the November 14th opening date this afternoon, so applicants can just prepare ahead of time. So please keep that in mind if we want to discuss new time dates. So we intend to open the solicitation on November 14th and close it on January 9th. That's going to be about an 8-week application period, which is normal for this program. For the new advisory committee members, this review timeline, though, is a bit more condensed than usual. I know I've been saying that the last few months. You guys have been busy. I just want to note that. So, and this is due to the addition of water and land conservation reviews. So typically we have a little bit more breathing room in this program, and you're only reviewing one set of grant guidelines at a time. We've been kind of speeding through that and doing multiple, so I appreciate the patience for that. Usually we're not this condensed in our timeline. After the solicitation closes on January 9th, we have regional review teams that will begin their process. And these teams are led by ODFW and PFA stream bios across 5 different regions. In our November meeting, I'll touch on this as a reminder to new committee members, and I'll go into more depth in our January meetings about those review teams and how they are included in this process. But it's important to note that these teams typically include ODFW staff, of course, ODF staff, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service staff, and NOAA staff. So I've started coordination with our partners who are available, but it's important to note that federal review capacity may be reduced this year. So the scope of reviewer comments provided to the committee may be reduced as compared to years past. So just keep that in mind, because these review teams help to inform your guys' decisions at the end of the day. Did I just lose the share right there?
Yeah.
Sorry, 1 second. I must have hit a hotkey.
Andy, can you back up a little bit? You said that the compressed timeline is due to additional grant guidelines.
Just the compressed, I mean, as in just like all the reviews that we're doing right now with everything. So like we're having you guys review a lot of documents. And usually we have a little bit more time on like the committee reviews. I think I did 6 weeks last year. And I think the regional reviews were 8 weeks long last year, as opposed to 6 weeks. So that's where we condensed some of the timelines. So that way we could still meet our April commission date as we normally do for project approval.
And that April date is just so that we can try to get the applicants their award prior to in-water work periods starting.
That is correct.
Like June, July?
Correct. Yep, exactly. Wow. Starts in around June, July, and around August, September, depending on what part of the state. Correct.
Great. Just noting that there was no kind of official deadline. These are self-imposed goals to try to get in front of Commissioner in April.
Thank you, Chad, for that clarification. I want to touch on some of the committee expectations over the next few months here. So just so you're aware, applicant interest is high this year, especially due to limited alternative funding sources throughout the state. We typically see around 70 to 80 applications. So just advising the committee members that number is probably going to increase this year. So just keep that in mind as you plan out your time period for reviews in February through March. I'll send out a revised draft grant guidelines and revised general application tomorrow to all the committee members to start their review for this grant solicitation. They have included track changes and some minor programmatic and formatting updates as requested last year. Just to frame the bigger picture, the water transaction guidance document that we are discussing today is an appendices of the master grant guidelines that I am sending to the committee tomorrow and will be posting online as draft. Edits for those draft guidelines as of now, hopefully you get those back from the committee by October 31st, which is a super quick turnaround, pending, of course, the next committee meeting that we schedule. Lastly, just keep in mind when you are reviewing the grant application over the next week, how it works is we actually print out the entire application form for the committee to review, and it prints out every single possible branch question in that application. So when you're looking at it, you're going to get a big PDF. That's if they answered yes to every question, and then it branches it out. So just keep that in mind. The application is going to look much larger than it is when you guys are reviewing it over the next week. I think that's what I wanted to briefly touch on. Oh, lastly, the in-person meeting we are planning to hold in March. That's going to be March 30th and 31st, as opposed to our typical early March in-person meeting in Salem. The 2-day meeting, I will also go over this with the committee either next month or in January of what to expect for that. It will be in Salem. This is a critical meeting. We all come in person as a committee with our stream bios. This is when the committee makes recommendations for funding to the commission. That's again, March 30th and 31st are those dates. Tiffany will be reaching out to help schedule anyone that needs travel help or hotel overnight. And then hopefully commission in April. I know we have a lot of discussion here, so happy to answer any questions, and then go from there. Joe?
Yeah, 2 quick questions. What should I plan on for that March 30th, 31st meeting? I'm in Portland, so I could potentially come back and forth.
Yes.
What is it, like a 9 to 5 thing I should put in my calendar, or what?
So usually what we've done is half days, essentially. So we'll do like on March 30th, we'll meet at, I'm trying to think, give me a second here. I think actually the first day is a full day. Or is it, no, the first was a half day, second was a half day. So yeah, we meet around 11 a.m. usually. And then we meet until about 5 or 6. That's when we do all the regional review and overview of each project. So you can come in from Portland that day. And then we meet the next morning, usually 8 a.m. until 11 a.m. And then we try to have everyone gone by lunch, typically. It can go longer because the second day is the committee's discussion. So I would put a hold till early afternoon to be safe.
Okay. And then my second question is, hello?
Yeah, Joe, I just want to also, Andy, can you also just clarify that we usually have a committee dinner and that lodging is an option for those traveling from other parts of the state?
Yes, so usually that first night we do have a committee dinner after, and we will help with any lodging in downtown Salem for travel and do travel reimbursements. And Tiffany will be reaching out in the coming months to confirm all that kind of stuff.
All right. Yeah, with that information, I would probably stay overnight then, just because the dinner and all that. But my other question was for the regional team reviews that are done by the agencies, is there any culling of the grants during that time that eventually reach the committee for review?
I'm sorry, you what
Are any of the grant proposals that are reviewed at that time deemed to be not deemable to put forward?
No, we do not do that.
Okay, so they all go forward. Okay,
Correct.
got
it. We do the only thing is basic like size fulfilling the basic needs of the grant application, but they can't submit an application without the basic needs being fulfilled in that sense. So anything that gets submitted means they've uploaded their attachments and everything required, but we don't preclude any application ahead of committee review. We just provide regional context and comments to it for the committee.
All right, thank
you.
For what it's worth, Joe, you'll see that reflected in some of the comments from the regional review teams, where those that maybe would have been culled will be pretty self-evident.
And I hope in the November meeting, I'll when we have some more time in January, I'll go over that process in detail on what it looks like, especially for the new committee members, so you guys have a better picture of how we support the review process with you guys in it. Mark?
Yeah, Andy, can you clarify, are the water acquisitions going to be part of this current round of funding or not yet? I wasn't clear about that.
That's going to be, I think, based on the committee's discussions and decisions today. So I won't be making that decision. From the department, we're happy to include it in this solicitation as we work through the comments, but that's just pending today's discussion. But we are prepared to move forward if the committee wants to move forward with it in this solicitation.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So Andy, just to recap, we've got fewer people doing the reviews, or you could say a reduced capacity for the regional reviews from our federal partners.
That's what we're expecting right now, but yeah.
We've got a compressed timeline to get the reviews done. We'll have a third of the committee having never gone through the process. and we'll have many more applications to review. Those are all facts, right?
Yep.
So how are we going to ensure that we're providing a quality review and that we continue to be successful in how we get money out the door? I mean, any one of those is a concern, but in combination, that's a pretty big lift.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if there's an answer for it, other than us just doing our best to meet the intent of the program and moving forward with what's ahead of us. I am confident that we'll be able to deliver on it with the timelines. It is condensed. But as we move forward, timelines can get massaged and they can get, extended. We can move stuff. I am on commission's agenda for April, but we can kind of move forward as we need to and adapt. And that's kind of how I plan to do it every year. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, that sounds good. I think that's appropriate that remains the goal. I'm confident that we can do it, but there is a lot of work ahead. And if we need to be flexible on things, I think it's important to recognize that from the start. Scott, you've got your hand up.
Chad, you did a great job of summarizing the daunting road ahead of us in terms of review. And then Andy, with what you said, regarding the expectation that we'll have quite a few more applications than we have in past years. I want to come back to Joe's point, because I think there was some hidden merit there in terms of perhaps, I don't know the best way to do it, but one option would be to empower our regional review teams to make a first cut when they find an application that is clearly either not meeting the priorities of the PFA or not ready for prime time, or such an outlandish proposal. And we did have a few of those last year that it clearly would not be a high consideration for funding. Perhaps they could take a first cut at reducing the workload, because it is going to be a heavy workload. And again, all the things Chad mentioned are legitimate by themselves, but you put them together, and I think that's a big deal. So just throwing that out as a thought that's in the back of my mind. I thought Joe might be onto something there.
We haven't, go ahead, Chad.
I was just going to say, I completely agree with Scott and Joe's comment, but looks like Courtney has something she'd like to say as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry if my cell service is bad. I generally agree. Where I have some hesitancy is if we start to incorporate some of the water, or when we get to land, I think we experience different perspectives as we're reviewing them all, and we sometimes
That's true.
End up pushing somebody forward that staff didn't necessarily see as hitting the marks. So
yeah, I would I appreciate it. I'll make note of this, and I'll just remind the committee that we do have a section of the review from staff that says recommending do not fund or to fund. And some of our reviewers speak to that, some do not. ODFW staff will speak to it. So I would encourage you to look at that as we're going through that process. And we can kind of move, and then adapt, we revisit this every year right after solicitation is over. We haven't preemptively removed stuff because that has not been a request from the committee. So that would be a new directive. If that's what we want to do, then that's something that I would want to know from you guys by November, before we get into the process, because that would be a new directive for us to preemptively select projects that has not been the process.
Yeah, Andy, I think that might serve the committee well to empower the regional review teams to be able to do that. But I would also want those that do get, culled or deprioritized or recommended to not be funded, whatever the term is used. I would like to see a list of them so that if there was one that really stood out to anyone on the committee, we could pull it back in for consideration. So you take the first cut, but then you do allow the committee to review those that got cut and see if there's any that stand out that, hey, I really want to reconsider this one.
Yeah, I like that.
Joe, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, for some reason the automatic hand isn't working, or it's not working for me anyway, so I can't see if it's up or not. But I just wanted to yeah, I'm just curious, like, how did that start, like not showing all, including all of them moving to the committee? Is it to try to be transparent with the public? Because that could be a good reason to keep it, not to go back on what I was saying, but unless there is good communication with the applicants that, hey, your proposal was rejected at the regional stage for X, Y, and Z reasons, then, I'm fine with not getting them, not having them go get it forward to committee. But I want to make sure that we do it in a way that's as transparent as possible with the public.
Chad, if you don't mind if I could respond to that.
Please do.
So just to paint that picture of how we do our feedback reviews, your guys' opinion is critical. I mean, so if we cut projects off at the regional review and we say, all right, this one's the merits aren't there to make it through the regional, which I have every confidence that our staff will be able to deliver that and meet the goal and intent of this program. But when they do a request for review, when the applicant comes back next year and says, I want feedback review or requested, we give them summarized comments. And those summarized comments are a summary of not only the regional review comments, but your guys' comments. And on top of that, you guys are the only ones that score it, and you guys being the committee. So they get to see, because our regional review teams do not have a scoring matrices. They have a comment matrices where they help you guys, where it helps to inform your decision. So my point being is if we have a project that's cut off at a regional review, when I give them a feedback request in March of next year or something, they won't see their score. They won't see the area that the committee has dealt with them saying you're lacking in this area. And that is a very critical portion of feedback for a grantee, is being able to see a scoring matrices and seeing where on that they're falling short, along with all the other reviews. That doesn't negate the importance of the regional reviews. Very, very important. But you guys are the decision makers. And seeing that matrices really does help them. So hopefully that's clear on the benefit of both sides. I don't think it would be horribly detrimental to cut some of those reviews, but I just want to paint the picture of what that does look like.
And Andy, just to answer Joe's original question, that was the intent of not having any of them cold prior to coming to the full committee, was so that it was a transparent process and that we were able to provide every applicant with the same set of matrices and comments so that they can figure out how to improve their application for the following year if they choose to reapply. Mark, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just two quick comments. I think one, we could also revisit it in early January when we find out exactly how many applicants we have this time. I mean, maybe we'll have a lot more or not significantly more. And then I guess just sharing, initially I used to read all the grants and then go look at the technical reviews, but the last couple times I've actually found it more efficient for me to read the technical reviews first so that I'm sort of keyed into what they're seeing. And, if all four technical reviewers do not think highly of the project, that helps me be a little more efficient in going through those projects. So that's another way to navigate the playing field.
That's a great point. When you use those technical reviews to kind of help guide your own review, it does make the process go a little faster.
I can, we can definitely revisit this. I can put this as an action item, maybe when we have a better idea of how many applications we get in January, and we go from there. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we also just need to be careful about having a process defined. So maybe we just go through it the same way we have this year, even if there are a lot more. And then we take time to really thoughtfully create a process on how staff may or may not cut or cull projects prior to them coming to the full committee.
Okay.
Instead of trying to say, let's just have them do it in order to make it easier this time.
Yeah, thanks. I'll put this on the action item maybe for next year as we do follow up with the lessons learned, which we try to get at after the cycle.
Mm-hmm. And at the very least, we would need to still see the list of those that got deprioritized so that if there were ones that stood out to any of the committee members for whatever reason, there's a pathway to bring them back under consideration.
Agree.
Any other comments on the fall solicitation? All right, and hopefully by the end of our meeting today, we'll be able to give Andy clear direction regarding the water rights acquisitions projects and whether or not they will be included in the November solicitation. Do you have anything else you'd like to add on the fall solicitation item there, Andy?
Nope, I'm happy to, if we want to briefly just get into that November meeting before we enter into discussion. That'd be helpful.
Yep, and I did receive a message from Courtney. She's struggling with cell reception, so she will be on it as available.
So just real quick, November, it dawned on me that our planned second Tuesday is a holiday. Can't have it on that day for our meeting. So proposing to push it up 1 week to November 4th. And we just want to make sure the committee here is available for that, if that works, or pushing it or another day.
I am not available the 4th.
Neither is Courtney.
I'm okay with the 4th.
When on the 4th? When on the 4th is it?
It would be from 12 to 2.
This is always a fun exercise to try to group calendar in the moment.
Yeah, I could do it from 12 to 1, but at 1 o'clock I got a meeting.
Andy, there's half the committee right there that's going to struggle to be able to meet the meeting.
Yep.
So what about Wednesday the 5th? It's not the Tuesday, but could we just maybe consider another day of the week? Does Wednesday at noon work for anybody?
Unfortunately, I'm out that whole week.
That whole week, okay?
Yep.
I'm speaking out of turn, but just I have cell for a minute here.
Great.
Friday is the only day I free up that week. I'm on the road the rest of it.
Okay. What about Monday of the following week? So instead of the 11th, we just move it up a day to the 10th. November 10th at noon. Shaking your head, is that a no?
No, I can't.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's going to be a hard week because then there's that rooftop to rooftop conference that week.
Yep. And then I'm out the following week. Well, let's look at Friday the 7th. Is anybody available Friday the 7th? Scott, I know that you've stated that you're not available that week.
I will be back that morning, so assuming I'm conscious, I can make a noon call.
Okay. I see
I'm
Joe's
available.
got his name up. Are you available, Mark?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's settled. We will certainly all be there, and hopefully our new committee members will be able to as well.
There's the benefit there. All right, I'll update that for Friday, November 7th.
Great.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for working with that.
And you said that was 11 to 1
12. It would be at 12 o'clock start.
to 2.
Yeah, that
Okay.
presumably. I haven't made that agenda yet. It might actually be a little shorter meeting anyways, because we're going through some known revisions in the solicitation, but that's really what it is. Okay, I'll send out an update invite and we'll post it online.
Great. Thank you. All right, we are on track for our 5th agenda item, acquisition guidance documents. Andy, can you lead us through any of the feedback that you've solicited, any feedback from the committee, and maybe pull up the draft language with comments?
Yeah. Yeah, happy to. Ooh, sorry, my computer's trying to force restart, right? Oh, come on. All right. Problem for 4
That's
hours
fine. I
from
keep getting the
now.
lights shut off.
Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Let me delay that and get into the document here. So, I can provide a real quick update. I'm sure some committee members. So as of last meeting, we were requested for the department to go engage with a working group around the conservation easements, or I'm sorry, around land transaction in this grant program and the creation of that guidance document. We have not met with them yet. We've got some edits we're working with. We'll be meeting with them this week. So hopefully we'll have a good update in time for when the committee actually does discuss this, which I'm presuming is going to be later this year or in January. But that is an ongoing right now. And of course, anyone online, we post all of our meeting materials and draft guidance documents at pfagrants.com. My contact information is available there. And as you have comments, you can submit them ongoing. That's what we said last meeting. So we still encourage it. Feel free to submit comments to me if you have any edits on that stuff. Hopefully that was helpful. I'm going to share some screen here with some combined edits.
So Andy, these are suggested edits from the committee, but what you were just describing is more of a public outreach effort to gather feedback, not necessarily edits for the document, right?
Yes,
And then
that's
we will
it's
take the feedback under consideration and then we may choose to make edits from there. But you aren't going
exactly.
to edit the document and bring it back to us with edits.
We're not working, they're not providing public comment yet for it. It's just providing revisions and edits and recommendations. So that's stuff that we'll be tracking as we kind of work with them to highlight it in the document. So it's going to be like what you guys have seen, where it's going to be track change revisions and called out that way. So that's how we plan to do it. At least how I plan going forward.
Just want to make sure that what is the product coming back to us is feedback for our consideration to incorporate as edits or not. And that we aren't going to look at an edited version of the document that is a result of what you are going through with your outreach efforts.
Yeah, so like I said, it will be track changes that we'll be bringing forward with it. I don't know what that is will look like or what the department's going to make as a recommendation going forward based on it, but every intention is to make it as clear as possible what's being commented on in those meetings, 100%, and then just provide it to you guys. So what you saw last month, will anything different? If there's space, it's going to be shown. That's my intention, like track change.
Yeah, maybe I would like to see that as a separate document rather than track changes to the document that we are then reviewing. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I see your point. I guess the only caveat I would make there is that, if people are picking up typos or just obvious corrections, that, help Andy improve the document, I just think those kind of edits, not really substantive edits, but just those kind of things should be picked up as he goes along.
Agreed.
Yep, that's kind of how I deal with edits for the committee, just in general. When it comes to it, like typos kind of stuff we fix. But like I said, any new additions, yeah, it's a different document. It will be posted as public comment when we get to that point.
Yeah. All right, just making sure that the process is as we are all expecting.
Appreciate it. No, it's always helpful. I didn't know, Chad, how you want to. Yeah,
where we left off and just read the comment and then we will just discuss as a group to incorporate it, address it, or not.
Yeah,
Does that work for everybody?
Yeah, seems like it will work for the group. And I encourage those. So I appreciate Scott and Courtney taking the time to send in the comments here. So for those who haven't yet on the committee, yeah, please obviously speak up as we talked offline, and let us know when you have a comment. Happy to address these as it is. It's about mainly the first half of the document where really that's the difference for the water transaction when we get into the weeds of stuff. So yeah, that works for me to kind of scroll through it here and facilitate the rest of the discussion. sorry to put some of you on blast here, Scott and Courtney, as we read your comments directly. But appreciate the understanding with that. I thought overall it seemed like you guys were good with what we have here, just some clarifying what we're going to pay for, how we're going to do it, and some clarifying questions that I thought were warranted. So this first one, I mean, I don't know, Scott. I don't want to be speaking. I don't want to speak for the committee members as we get through this. So Scott, I'd be happy to ping you here.
This kind of speaks back to the discussion we had earlier about potential workloads. And since this is an unknown for us, at least in this granting body, I was curious if, in your putting together the application and the guidance documents, if you had an inkling from those other agencies that have done this, do they get a lot of requests or a lot of grant proposals, applications in this? And just, again, trying to future what the workload is, because it was a pretty heavy lift last year without this type of project. So I'm just, being mindful of that. That's really it.
Trying to see if I think Spencer had to log off because he would have some great understanding of what other programs are doing here, and I don't see him on here. It's a great question. Oh, Mark, were you going to have some insight to that?
Well, I don't have the insight on how many applicants we'll get, but my guess is that the water rights stuff is pretty complicated. It's kind of an arduous process to go through to develop a project like that. And I think there's actually relatively few organizations and applicants that are likely to go down that pathway. So I just think, given it's pretty specialized, but I suspect there'll be a few applications, but I think for most people, it's not something they're going to wade into. So I'd kind of be surprised if we saw a lot. I could be really wrong, but that'd be my guess.
That's I'd echo that, Mark. I think the bulk of our program applicants are geared towards the restoration side of this program, like implementation type of restoration side of the program, and I think that's where we're going to see most of our applications. Maybe especially in these first few years as we roll out these new additions to within the program, some might be waiting to see how we fund stuff next year and what that looks like before they apply. So I wouldn't see too much. I can't really speak to other agencies. Mark Grimbremmer's not on here yet. I think he'll be joining later. So when he hops on, I think that'd be a good question to ask him from OWEB and what their perspective is too.
Okay.
But it was good. But yeah, sorry, I don't have too much more insight on how much is being funded from other agencies. All right, let's work through here. Like I said, there wasn't a horrible amount of comments in here. This kind of spoke to, I think, Scott, what I was just saying, that the program's kind of more restoration based. I don't know if you wanted to add context for this comment.
This related to the comment we just discussed. Kind of remains to be seen if we do end up with a lot of projects in this under the water category, or perhaps even some of the lesser, I won't say lesser important, but lesser submitted categories, like the planning projects, monitoring projects. Well, I stated it right there. My bias tends to be doing projects on the ground, moving the needle as quickly as you can. And so recognizing that bias, this is how I dealt with it when I was in charge of some funding pots in my past life. I automatically earmarked a portion of those funds to go towards planning projects, monitoring projects, etc., such that you'd have got a phone ringing here in the background. Sorry about that. But anyway, you'd have a pipeline of projects coming to.
Yeah, and that would be that's a committee decision. As of date, the committee has not partial petition funding into different bins. It's been one funding bin moving forward, and that's kind of been just a committee directive going forward. The committee has the authority to revisit that if they want to. But that would be my response. I don't know if anyone else wants to add to that or request anything.
Yeah, I could just add, Scott, that, I think as soon as we do that, then we unnecessarily limit ourselves to what we should or shouldn't or can or can't fund. And if we end up with a slew of excellent implementation projects we may be saying that we can't fund them because we've agreed or determined that we need to provide funding to other project types regardless of their merit. We've made this category. And so I don't know how to address the bias, or even if it's appropriate to address the bias, if the bias is that we're looking for the most uplift or the most bang for our buck or the most immediate uplift. And I think that's something that we can discuss as a committee, but thus far we haven't set subcategories of funding aside for any one project type. They've all had to compete against each other based on the merit of the individual project and how well it aligns with the goals. That's kind of where we're at now. I see where you were getting at by kind of forcing that bias to be addressed through dedicated funding, but that's why we haven't done that so far.
Okay. Yeah, in my past, that was something that was pointed out to me, that, hey, you're biased, and because this is what we're seeing. And when I stepped back and looked at it, it's like, oh, you're 100% correct. I am biased towards funding work on the ground versus, priming the pump for out years. And I thought, all right, how can I address that? And it was arbitrary. The split of funding was arbitrary. And your point is well taken, Chad. It's spot on. And perhaps it'll solve itself. If people put in the time to put together these grant applications for a year or two in a row and do not get selected, they're probably less likely to keep doing that in the future. So just a thought.
Yeah. And the inverse is true as well, right? If there's a lot
Yeah.
of those project types that are being funded, it might incentivize others to go ahead and do the hard work necessary to prepare one of these types of projects.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Scott, I was just wondering, bringing up your experience of bidding project funding, so you, like you just said, there was kind of a bias there, but did you think it was beneficial in the programs that did bin the funding?
I think so. Yeah. Again, because it did end up priming the pump for out year projects, which it's not always a given. And granted, I would put the blinders on. I was just mostly with federal land managers, around the state of Oregon and Washington. And, sometimes they didn't have funding to develop a project unless we were able to award them that funding because they had pretty tight budgets. And so it resulted in a wider breadth of projects over a larger geographic area in that case. So, but we have no shortage of projects here so
Exactly.
far.
That's what I was going to follow up with, Scott, is that, until we start to see that we have more funding than projects,
Yeah.
I don't think we necessarily need to address that issue. It seems to be working out.
Yep. Okay.
Courtney, I think Courtney's still there. Yep. I see you highlighted a section here. Didn't want to skip over it. I didn't see any comments. It was all water transactions must align with the broader goals of the PFA grant program, specifically providing conservation benefits to species covered by the Habitat Conservation Plan.
Yeah, no, I just, that was more for me. I was highlighting, I always try to highlight a couple home base.
Oh, okay,
points.
I understand.
And so that was my own review trick, and I forgot to undo it.
I do the same thing. I just wanted to allow space if that was comment. So if I see it again, I'll just brief over it. Thank you. Scott was asking if we wanted to include a short definition of each project type and relative priority. I don't have an assigned priority for this, at least from my perspective when it comes to these projects, right? I think their applications should speak to the priority of it.
Well, Andy, to be fair, the application will say that it's a high priority.
Well, yes, but there's one water application compared to another one that splits two split season ones applying for each other. You should be able to see the priority between the two, right? In that sense, it should speak to its own merit, I would say, like when you're comparing two different applications.
It would be helpful, though, to have Spencer or yourself or someone from the department define what these are.
Mm-hmm.
And then the priority can be interpreted later, but just to have a little better definition would be helpful. And I think Spencer did that for us during the last
He
meeting.
did do it verbally. Yep, we can definitely throw this in here. Not a problem. Mark?
Mark, you've got your hand up. Mark, if
You're
you're
muted, Mark.
speaking. Still unable to hear you, Mark.
Sorry, one more time. I was just going to second Scott's suggestion that a little definition would be a good idea, and it sounds like other people were already moving in that direction.
No problem. No problem.
All right, Andy. Keep us moving. If we get through this, then, you know, there's the next discussion as to whether or not we can include it in November solicitation. But if we don't get through the document, then the discussion we won't be able to have it.
Yeah. Also, a brief discussion on scoring before we conclude. I don't want to forget that either. The scoring matrices for this. But we're getting through there. Let's see. We have Courtney added some language here. Eligible applicants should provide examples of past experience. Yes, that's part of the application process, actually. In one of the questions, they'll have to speak to it. For those who are applying for funds. So that is spelled out in there. I don't know if we want to make it more clear here. Doesn't bother me to keep it in here, but just to address it, Courtney, we will have them speak to it.
Andy, I think we should include it in the guidance so that the applicant doesn't have to wait to find it in a question in the application. So when they review the guidance documents, they know to expect that question.
Yep. Happy to keep it in there. It's pretty standard question when we come to it because we want, if we're giving someone a lot of money, they best be giving some
You
justification.
certainly don't want one of these
manage
coming
it.
from me.
Yeah. Yeah. No problem.
Yeah, I think I was just reading it like sometimes materials get divorced from one another accidentally. It's always good that they still echo.
I agree. And that's also a big reason why there's a lot of material in here that's in the main solicitation. Same thing. It just stuff. People look at one thing, they tunnel vision it. So thank you. So moving through eligible costs, you're just adding some additional language here. I believe this is Courtney's revisions. I know, Courtney, I didn't want to speak for you on this one if you wanted to.
Yeah, I do, because I think these are these change. It changes the theme of the eligible costs, and so it's not just minor revisions. And I thought it's worthy of a committee discussion. Most of my comments were in the category of asking the question around whether we really want to reach as far back for eligible reimbursable items as the current language articulates. And it feels somewhat like some of Scott's conversations. I tend to want to see kind of direct uplift, like work on the ground, and I have some concern about making eligible a lot of soft costs that may end up carrying quite a bit of maybe large ticket items. And so most of my edits then are refining language in a way that would tighten that up. You know, my suggestion was to remove the eligibility of costs incurred 3 years past, 3 years prior, and focus more on these being funding projects from here forward, acknowledging costs incurred between when application was made, you know, something like that, where, you know, after
Between the
closing date
application
of the
and the award.
application.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not to say that any of the actions are wrong. It's just a question, I guess, for the committee and discussion about, do we want to spend resources, you know, on reimbursing things? So that
Courtney,
was
I think that
that's what
you're
most of the
making
rest of my comments are about.
I think you make a really good point, Courtney, and it gets back to some of the original discussions that we had around the other sets of projects. And would the project have occurred if not for our funding? And we do want to make sure that our funding is having projects occur that would not otherwise, rather than just a new pot of money to pay for projects that are going to happen anyway. An example was a timber company wanted to replace a culvert and do some downstream restoration. We said, we're not going to replace the culvert because that project has to happen anyway. But we will fund the section of restoration below the culvert while the machine is there. So I think that's kind of in line with what we've already discussed as a committee. We want these projects to be happening because of our funding, not our funding just backfilling projects that would have been done otherwise. With that, Mark, you've got your hand up, and then Joe, I do see your hand up, and we'll get to you right after Mark.
Yeah, I think those are all good points. I just think the reality of some of these water right acquisition things, in order for them to go forward, to get a certified water rights examiner out there, or to look at some of the legal aspects of water rights, there's a fair bit of due diligence they have to do. And they're going to spend that money ahead of writing the grant. And it may turn out on their part, they go, well, it's not a viable project, or it doesn't pencil out. But if it does pencil out, they'll go ahead and develop a grant and submit it. And I guess from my perspective, we'll be evaluating that grant in the context of efficiency, benefit relative to cost. And, if it's too lopsided with the sort of pre-project costs relative to the benefits, it won't presumably score well, or it may score well. So I guess I'm not as bothered by having that in there. I think it's still incumbent on the applicant to, demonstrate that it's a really worthy project and they've done their homework to do it. But I do think some of these water rights acquisitions have a lot of complexities to them that they have to sort out ahead of time. And if it's a viable project, it'd be okay to reimburse them. I did like, Courtney, somewhere else you had a point about, I think, reimbursing them when the project is completed. And that has some benefits, some pros and cons to it, but part of that was attractive to me as well.
Yeah, I think my thought on that was acknowledging all those things you said to be very true. If we fund, could we put the reimbursement at the end, so that if the project costs go over in implementation, the reimbursable, drawdown on those pre-application years happens last with whatever is remaining. And so we don't cut the project off short necessarily because of reimbursement costs.
I'd be happy to address at least what the process looks like for reimbursement in this program. So they can file for advancement of funds, reimbursement. This for water projects, if they're doing delayed terms escaping me, but like not deferred watering, they don't get reimbursed till after. And we've made that clear in the application. That would be like in September is when they'd have to show proof of whatever water project they're showing that there was a benefit before they get reimbursed, other than just standard staff hours to go out and do stuff, where that's kind of a standard reimbursement process. It would be very difficult to reimburse a subset of stuff before. So like partitioning how we reimburse stuff gets a little difficult, and holding off pre-project reimbursement until we do the full project, it just gets administratively hard to kind of do that.
Well, Joe, did you have something on this?
Yeah, I
And
do.
if so, please chime in.
Yeah. I was curious if there is a history of any issues or problems with this issue of, expenditures that are kind of not really deemed to be part of the project or kind of peripheral. I want, so I want to hear from people that have been on the committee and Andy if that has been an issue. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. And I do kind of agree with Mark on, the consultant fees for water evaluation and legal review could be complicated and out of the scope of the applicant, and they would need that input. I think it should be timely. It shouldn't be like, hey, we had a review 2 years ago. It should be framed within the timeline of the application, I guess, or some type of boundary in the past that we should place on it. And then I was curious, Courtney, why you removed negotiations, in particular that term. I'm curious about why, because I would assume it takes not just engagement, but actually go back and forth and with the landowner or what have you to kind of come to the terms of agreement. So, and I think that's valid to cover it, again, if it's in the time frame of the project that's being supported by the grant. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there's nuance to negotiations. There's several phases of it. There's a phase of negotiation where folks are determining if all parties are in agreement that they want to do the work. And then there is, I think, a lot of what we really think about, what we're talking about, which is the technical nuance of the terms that you negotiate with. But where I'm questioning is, do we want to be funding the early stage, the part where they're just starting to discuss whether everybody is in agreement that they want to do this together? And I would like to think that that has already occurred, and that is prior to them, that they're bringing us a project or an initiative that everybody is on board with, and that we're not funding them trying to get everybody on board. So I think where I don't know how to better do that, divide out that kind of those phases of negotiation.
Well, I would like to add that we do have some allowances for costs that exceed. And is it 10%? What is the percentage that we allow approval, pending committee approval, where they can go over budget?
Oh, I mean, it would be committee approval first, and department approval, like recommendation to the committee at that point, but it would be a 10%.
So if it was in the final stages of negotiations and something had come up that was undiscovered in the original negotiations, there is a pathway where we have some leeway to say, hey, unexpected things occur. And we've had that happen, right? And we have approved it. But what we haven't done is retroactively funded attorney fees for creating projects in those preliminary negotiations to try to engage landowners and say, hey, here's a project we would like to do. Come and meet with our attorneys and we're going to negotiate. And then we're going to hope to cover all of those fees in the grant process itself. So it's kind of like what you had mentioned, Joe, around, do we want to go 2 years back and fund all of that kind of preliminary work? Or do we want to fund the piece that gets the project over the line? We also don't have to limit ourselves by including the language, but it does kind of weed out some of the things that would likely come up in discussion and things that historically, the next part of your question, we have funded portions of the costs, but gone through the budget because that's a requirement that they have a line item budget and said, these are the things that we are not going to fund. And we've also done that in the past. So I think including the language is helpful to just avoid that process. But, there is merit to what Mark had said. If the project's good, maybe we do consider it. That's all that I have to add.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there's just something in front where the first line that says costs must be directly tied to execution of water transactions within this time frame, and then, or within that way you can keep all that stuff in there, but you're restricting it to a certain time frame, and that it should be focused on completion of the project rather than superfluous stuff. I don't know. That's just a quick thought, but I don't know if that would make Courtney happy or not.
I think that's.
I come up with 2 years, seems like, cutting it from 3 years to 2 years. And again, I think we have the opportunity when we review the projects, if we feel like it's not cost effective, the project will score accordingly. So
yeah,
I just know that negotiations of transactions, take a bit more upfront work, and maybe it doesn't play out and they don't get reimbursed. But if they're successful, I think some of those are a legitimate part of the project, particularly when you're talking about legal acquisition of whether it's water rights or conservation easement or something like that.
Totally agree. The only thing I would add is we still want to be that, this project wouldn't have occurred but for our funding. And so if those negotiations already have occurred because the project is going to happen, us funding those negotiations, would the project have not occurred if we don't? Or is it just additional funding for that organization to then go and spend on their next set of negotiations for the next projects? I'm not sure that I'm on board with all of the negotiating fees to get the project kind of application ready.
I mean,
But
you can say
I don't
stakeholder
feel most-
engagement. That's a pretty broad definition there. So
That's right. And Courtney does have that suggested language about halfway through the bullets there. So in the interest of time, I guess I am not too put off by preliminary or exploratory due diligence and legal expenses are not eligible, but stakeholder engagement is. And I think that language kind of captures what Joe was trying to get at, that we want to finalize projects. We don't want to have exploratory funding for projects.
Chad, if I may. I really appreciate Joe's comment of drawing a broad stroke maybe for this and just putting like a 2-year at the timeline up here, like 2 years prior. Because there's, negotiations happening throughout the entire project at the end of the day. And like, we need to allow the ability for the grantee to adaptively manage the effort. We have plenty of projects right now that landowners fall out of. They just do. They back out last minute. They're the middle landowner in a 3-parcel project. They have to go now negotiate something, right? To make up for the loss of that landowner being involved. So there's other effects of us not allowing for negotiation. But I think instead of getting into the nuance of each one of these, drawing a broad stroke might be the easiest solution here. And just saying a 2-year time window before you submit the application. And then maybe some high level touch points here. Maybe we reduce this list even. I don't know. But I would encourage almost more of that broad sense.
Yeah, I understand where you're getting at, Andy, but there's also a point where your project is no longer the same project that was put in front of the committee. And we saw that as well, where the middle landowner backed out and we had to adjust the project based on that, right? So how much leeway do we allow in negotiations? Because what you're describing is post-award, and what we're describing here is pre-award. And those are two very different things. One is getting a project to completion, and one is getting a project application ready. I do want to recognize Courtney. Do you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, Andy, maybe help. I'm realizing I was trying to pull it up real quick.
Yeah.
Right now, applications that come in the past, have they been eligible for reimbursement of expenses predating the application?
They have to request it.
I thought I read.
But
Yes, okay, because that's what I read. I read it, and the section I had read, I'm trying to find it. Was I think pre-project reimbursements.
Pre-agreement costs. Yeah.
And there is no time. Yeah, there is no timeline attached. I couldn't find.
In the current.
So this is partly why I in the current program. And so how does adding this marry up to? I mean, it starts to be a little different in eligibility, because we even say you can't, costs associated with applying for the PFA grant are not eligible. And in theory, all this due diligence is preparing for it. But I think what you really mean to say the costs associated with, the actual drafting of the grant agreement. But I'm just trying to see how these sort of sync up.
This is separate from restoration or implementation planning grants. So there is, essentially the committee is creating the eligibility guidelines separate. It does not have to sync up to that main one. This is, if you're applying for a water project, this is your eligible cost for it. So they shouldn't be looking at the eligible cost for implementation projects, because the new guidance that you guys will see next week in that main document will say this only applies to implementation, planning, research, such and such. And for water transactions, you must reference this document. Does that help? Does that answer your question?
No, I know that technical. I know the technical division. I think I'm thinking about the precedence and premise of how we're approaching it. You know, why one but not the other, and I'm just trying to make sure that my north compass is pointing north on this. Or, you know, that's probably the wrong way to think about it. But I just am trying to make sure I'm aligning with the purpose and intent. And so,
yeah, it's much more broad stroke in our regular guidance. We've encouraged, my interpretation is encouraged a pre-project, getting projects up and going through this grant program. Moving the needle for projects has been what this grant program's encouraged throughout the years, and making a difference for the covered species. A lot of that requires costs up front. And so, yeah, precedent, I would say it's been somewhat more encouraged, and this is the most restricted that we've been.
Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I guess I still like the idea of, Andy, or your idea of just sort of 2 years, which is a little bit of a broad stroke, but I think it takes some of the onus off you of trying to decide what's fair play or not fair play. You know, Courtney, I noticed you struck consultant fees for water evaluation, and I guess for me, I would tend to include that because our application specifically requires them to provide some assessment of evaluation for the water right there. So it seems like if we're telling the applicant they have to give us that, it's certainly fair game for them to invest their own money up front to come up with those cost estimates, essentially an appraisal.
I think most of my edits will start to become moot if shifting to like a 2-year. Most of these were under an approach of not making eligible for reimbursement back work. So I would lean to you all that are more technical in that to make sure the list is accurate, and I would caution my edits from here out. And I would ask too, if we lean to a 2-year envelope for does the committee have the ability, once we see what happens? Part of it is we don't know what we're going to get and what it's going to create. Right. Do we have the ability to go back in a later year and tighten the guidelines if we think that is worthy of time?
So two points on that, Courtney. Yes, we do. We can go back and tighten it up. And second, we can also look at the individual application and individual line items in their requested budget and either approve or not approve individual costs that we see as appropriate or not appropriate. So in the interest of time, I'd recommend we move to the 2-year kind of broad strokes. We still retain the ability to look at the budget line item by line item. And as we have in the past, select those that we think are inappropriate and not fund those and fund the rest of them. And I think that addresses pretty much everybody's concerns that have been voiced so far. But if not, please chime in. Otherwise, we'll just ask if we can go to the next comment.
Yeah, I think it's agreed for me, and it's going to go quick because most of my comments you don't need to spend time on anymore.
Just for clarity then, so we were at the 2-year timeline here from point of application submission, and then we'll leave language as originally intended in this section.
I'm fine with that. And Courtney, are you fine with that, knowing that we do get to look at individual line items in the budget? Looks like a thumbs up.
We do get a revision. next year. We're going to learn a lot this year in this first run.
We'll leave it open. We'll see what we get, what the applications look like, how much work it is, how appropriate the costs are that are included, and we will offer the same feedback that we did in the original solicitations, that the better the projects are and the less kind of a stretch or squinty-eyed look we have to take at what those costs are, the better it will reflect on the applicants, and it'll likely need less specific language. I think we did talk about that in the original solicitations, that be aware of the costs that you are including in your application, because it'll affect the process moving forward.
I'm just adding a note here that the 2-year thing, so I can fix it up.
Yeah.
I think Courtney's comment might have been addressed here then, talking about the timeline. She's nodding yes. I think that's what that discussion was. Okay.
And that'll be really key too, Andy, when we onboard new committee members, that they understand the purpose of the program and the necessity to provide uplift. I mean, the HCP considers this work, and we need to make sure that it is supported by this work. That is kind of the guiding principle of all of this, is we need to secure the HCP and the incidental take permit. Otherwise, this entire program dissolves. So that's why we have to stay so focused on meeting those goals and objectives.
Moving through here, we have under additional budget considerations, the cost of final stages, appraisal, environmental assessments, site surveys. I don't know, Courtney, if you want to speak more to that. You're striking through appraisal, environmental site assessments as eligible costs.
Yeah, I think you can disregard, because this was in a scenario of moving away from pre-application reimbursables.
Working our way through. Agreement cost of project. I think you're just after completing applications for the grant program. So that would have been different at that point. I'm just going to modify to match language above.
Yeah, because here you've got that 3-year timeline.
Yep, I'll fix that up there. And I was looking at.
I think you captured it. Match language agreed on above.
No, please. I'm working on like 3 different guidance documents at once, guys. So I really appreciate it. If you guys see something and I say something wrong, my head could be in a different guidance document. So thank you. All right, Scott, I got you here. Oh, please. Courtney?
In the pre-agreement section, the only questions I'd had is, when we do reimburse, if we are doing reimbursements, do you write it as a not to exceed? Like when you write the contract,
Yes.
Does that particular awardee get a not to exceed in that category?
We have a great question. So I'll outline real quick. We have a not to exceed category in our contract on their total reimbursement. With that, each budget category, they do have a not to exceed account that's not called out in the contract, but for them to exceed it, they have to file an amendment with the department to review and move funding from one area to the next. So if they have a pre-agreement cost for 10,000, but they want 12,000, we're not funding that extra 2,000. That's how it is.
Okay.
Unless they request an amendment for some reason, and if it is a change to the scope of work and the intent of the program, like we've done previously, we bring that amendment in front of the committee, or the department reviews the amendment. But that's how it goes.
I think you mean and, not or,
And that-
right, Andy?
And yeah,
The committee sees the amendment. Yeah, that's just to clarify, it's not an or. It's not the department or the committee. It is the committee that does the review.
Yeah, so there's some programmatic amendments that the department moves through and approves stuff with moving things around in a budget. That's just day-to-day work that happens. But when it's like a line item, you know, I mean, we don't really see pre-agreement costs anyways, that often. But I can make it, you know, certain things we can highlight a priority and I can bring more forward in front of the committee, you know, and we can review what that looks like in the future. Scott highlighted third-party valuation here. And that any water rights gained through the transaction result in meaningful flow. Scott, I don't know if you want to elaborate on this.
No, it came up in conversation at our last meeting. I think, you know, some of these streams that we're talking about are likely to be so over allocated that, you know, even if, say, a project said we're going to gain 10%, 20% back, but if it's 300% over allocated, and that won't result in any meaningful surface flow. And I don't know the right way to phrase that, but you may not be getting anything for this project. I just wanted to assure that for the money we're going to grant these folks, we're going to get some water in the stream. And if in reality, not just on paper.
Yeah, Andy, I think you do need to capture that it must be wet water. Mark, you put your hand up?
Like that.
Yeah, I was just going to say I second that also.
Could you guys clarify what guidance you would like here so I fully understand?
I think you need to work with Spencer to come up with specific language, but what we're trying to say is that the water right must be issued or purchased or acquired below 100% allocated, so that the water is actually wet water, not theoretical water, because 10% of a 300% over allocated stretch is not actually adding any water. It is just reducing the amount that it's over allocated. And so again, you're going to have to work with your experts, and Spencer is clearly an expert. You understand the intent of what we're trying to describe, but I think it's going to be up to you to capture that with the appropriate language.
Yep, thank you. I was just looking to get carried forward what you guys recommend in there. Appreciate it. Just discussion of match here. We don't have any match required for the program for this portion of the program. Courtney recommended applicant just a little bit more language.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah, so, well, let me, so again, this was in a theory of no reimbursables back. And so acknowledging the value of the organization's contribution of having covered those costs prior to application. If they're applying, I guess the question I would have is, we've seen organizations provide match on projects before in other programs. And I know they're not the same, but it's kind of what I have to anchor to a little bit. And it's not required here. But if we're talking about what they can do, if they're applying for reimbursement, we would not encourage them. We would not accept that as, I know it's not required, but I'm trying to figure out like how sometimes they show match and it's not required, but we wouldn't want them to show match on things they're requesting reimbursement for.
Yeah, that's all fair, Courtney. But I think if they decide that they are not going to request reimbursement, that they may demonstrate those costs as match on behalf of their organization.
Yes.
I think your language captures that.
Agreed.
I see no problem with adding this. It doesn't require that they do it, but it gives them an avenue to say, hey, those are already sunk costs. We're going to say that that is match, which does make a project more competitive, although not required. If looking at two projects and one has match and one does not, we usually do fund the one with the match. So I think that leaving it in here creates no barriers for organizations, but it does create a pathway for them to be more competitive if they so choose. Andy?
I appreciate it. I'd encourage the committee in letting me have a little bit more flexibility in encouraging match and not calling out a specific kind, maybe. Maybe echoing a little bit more to Chad's comment of the value of match in there. They're going to include it if they're not requesting rebirth. It's just kind of a standard process. But aside from just calling out pre-application, I could put something in there like match is not required, but I could speak how it adds an extra point to the scoring or something like that.
That's appropriate, but also highlighting that it is their option to include pre-project costs as match if they so choose.
We can call it out specifically. That's fine. Most of them will, is just what I'm getting at, but it doesn't hurt.
And you could
Is
fix my
anyone
grammar.
opposed to that language being included?
Nope.
I don't see any pushback, Andy, so if we can go ahead and include that, it would be great.
I
And
think
Courtney, are you open to Andy wordsmithing that a little bit? Just kind of capturing that match isn't required. Match does make projects more competitive and that pre-project costs are eligible to be used as match.
Yeah, yes, please wordsmith, fix my grammar, all the things.
Thank you, Scott. We do link stuff in our online application speaking to when they're having to call out basins or something like that. So that will be linked in the application. It should be in there too. Let me say do one thing or the other.
Okay.
How do we make sure they are documenting formal engagement or buy-in from impacted and involved stakeholders, including partners? Maybe the landowner language. Courtney said that. Courtney, you had a question about landowner engagement and how we understand what they're doing for it. So when we have one of the questions in the application actually allows space for landowner engagement, and it will ask them what they've done for it. And then on top of that, a new requirement this year that you guys will see as a recommendation is a landowner agreement or acknowledgement form. Between project partners and landowners.
Yeah,
That's great.
that was kind of my comment, which was just to thread it for consistency, because I know it's in the checklist as well, but I mean, and I guess the first question is to ask if it's true. I know when I reviewed, I was assessing for how mature the stakeholder engagement or the formal relationships were. In some programs, I would find myself wanting to understand the same here. And so I was just trying to be overt in this section about what reviewers will be looking for.
Yeah,
Andy,
so
I think this is an appropriate one to add. Just we have also seen projects come through as applications where the landowner engagement hasn't occurred, and it was going to be part of the project cost that they were going to do this engagement and outreach to try to develop the project, which didn't get funded, right? Because we aren't going to fund something that is an unknown as to whether or not it even becomes a project. So having some kind of acknowledgement that the landowner is on board or has been notified, I don't see a problem with that.
Yeah, the recommendation would be an acknowledgement, but I would like to flag, Chad, real quick. We do fund planning projects, and some of that will involve unknown. So I just want to flag that for the committee and being open for that, because that's part of the process sometimes. But there is a question that says if you're planning on doing a project, and you don't have your landowner agreement, they have to justify to you guys in the next application why they don't have that. So you're going to get more info behind that.
I would also say, Andy, there's a big difference between planning a tide gate where you're asking for engineering and schematics versus planning a water right where you're going to go and ask for funding to approach landowners to maybe consider. One, the project is, you've already got the project in place and you're asking to plan schematics and engineering. And one is you're planning on reaching out to people that may or may not be interested. Those feel very different to me.
Yep, and you might get a project type like that. They could hit a planning when they're doing project selection. And I'm just highlighting all the options that could happen. But when they hit what project type they're applying for, we've allowed more than one project type in the years past. So they could hit planning and water transactions. As of now, we can change that, but just to flag that, it could come through.
Yeah, and then it becomes the same discussion that we had earlier about the 2-year look back. Are we going to get applications that are just doing it on the front end and say we're going to ask to fund ourselves for the next 2 years to see what we might be able to accomplish?
Yeah. You guys will be able to weed through that too.
So how are we going to resolve the comment here? Are we going to include partner and landowner engagement requirement here as suggested, or are we not?
Oh, yeah, I thought it was included or as is. I thought it was like a good addition. That's what I'm
Okay.
recommending to the program in general, just highlighting what that
Great.
process looks like for it and what I'll be recommending next at our next meeting. Because we do need that. We need more commitments. It just gets difficult. And they're just acknowledgements. It's not a legally binding agreement, just so you guys are aware of that.
It's just saying the landowner knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
They're included in the application.
Yeah, it's very important. So no, I appreciate it. I'm just making sure that this confirms landowner understands the application. Okay, I did put in there. I was reading that. I think that might be the last of our comments, if I recall correctly.
Andy, for what it's worth, I did reach out to some experts in this space that also reviewed the documentation and were quite comfortable with it.
Oh, great. That's good to hear.
I personally don't have expertise in this area, so I just reached out to those that do, and that's why there's no comments, because they were quite comfortable with the language.
Okay, now that's good to hear. And I know, Chad, you've been echoing it, and I appreciate it. This is our first year at this. For everyone online, we ask for feedback after every solicitation. For no new committee members here, we go through, I really look at applicant feedback. And those are what you are going to see next week or tomorrow when I send you updated guidance. A lot of it is from applicant feedback I'm putting directly into there and seeing how it mends. So, and that goes for you guys as we work through this. This is an ongoing thing. So I'm happy to hear they're happy with the draft. But I'm sure we'll be able to get some great revisions next year as we work through it. The only outstanding thing I have, Chad, I know we're pushing on the timeline here, but is a scoring matrix. And that's one thing we can either discuss at the next meeting, but we do want to make sure to discuss that before the solicitation if we're going to score water transaction projects separate than the other project types.
Yeah, Andy, in order to honor that work, I do think that we need to have time for a full discussion, and we are out of time for that lengthy discussion. So I think we need to have that as an agenda item in the November meeting.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Now, that being said, Andy, if we're able to get that completed in the November meeting, then these water rights acquisitions could still be included in the November 14th solicitation, correct?
Yes, I am. We prepped. We're ready to include it as the committee is. So what I'll do is wrap up stuff in here. Send this out as a reference to the committee. If I've missed anything from today's discussion, I encourage you to please let me know immediately. Like if you see something, if I missed something, please do that. And then I'll send you the next guidance going forward.
So looking at the scoring matrix, moving that to the next meeting in no way impairs our ability to include these in the next solicitation.
That is correct.
Very good. Mark, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I'll just give you 30 seconds on my thoughts on the scoring matrices. I think we just could use the exact same one. We scored the water rights projects previously using the same matrix. If you use a different matrix, then it gets really hard to crosswalk the scoring to the other projects. And then you sort of verge into getting two different buckets for funding pots. So at least without the benefit of a lot of discussion, I would tend to just keep the same criteria. They seemed to work when we did it last time. And I think it keeps it simpler, but all can be discussed later, but just to share that at the moment since I thought about it some.
Thank you for sharing that perspective, Mark. I wholeheartedly agree. I just want to make sure that we have the time and space to have a discussion about it. And I think that there is real merit in keeping the criteria the same across all the project types so that it's more of an apples to apples comparison. And then Andy, maybe you can also talk about how we normalize those scores from different scorers in the next process as well. We've moved to Z-score last year, and I think that worked pretty well. But if you could also add kind of a primer for those of us that may have forgotten how it works, and for those new committee members that will be their first meeting, to talk about how do we normalize the scores that I assign versus someone else's. My 10 might be their 8. And so how do we address that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, happy to open up for discussion. And I'll reshare the documents for that meeting too when we get to it.
Anything else on the guidance?
I don't have anything else from you guys.
This was our last agenda item. Is there anything for the good of the order from the committee? Okay. Well, it sounds like we will see each other on November 7th.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks.